Welcome everybody to more or less Notes to the New Mayor. I'm Michaela Martegani. I'm the director of More Art, and More Art is a public art and social justice nonprofit organization that was founded in 2004. And which provides a platform for artists to create free and accessible socially engaged art projects in the public space. And it goes without saying that we are coming out of two extremely challenging years where uncertainty, isolation, and fear have been our prevalent mood. But the pandemic has also allowed us to reflect on the meaning and value of the work we do. And this current technology has allowed us to continue meaningful conversations about topics we all care about. And this is why last fall, with the new administration coming in, we decided to dedicate our at the table salon style conversations to what we believe are the three basic rights of every New Yorker, namely access to food, shelter, housing, and healthcare. And what came out of these conversations were the individual voices of New York City residents. So we, the New York City residents, do indeed have dreams and expectations, and quite frankly, demands, and we want to express them clearly so that we can be sure they're heard. And as always, in our organizations, we turn to artists who, as a lot, are used to manage economic precariousness, so that we can use their skills and their strategies to envision creative solutions, solutions that are imaginative, but also often extremely pragmatic. And we put all of this in an open letter to Mayor Adams and the new administration. And tonight we will expand on those ideas. So I'm really grateful to our panelists tonight, artist Candace Thompson, who will be talking about access to food, Betty Yu, who will be talking about housing, and Jeff Kasper, who's going to be talking about healthcare, along with Nathan Hunter, Bronx-based educator, and steward from Bronx Foodway, Michael Higgins, senior housing and sustainability organizer from Brooklyn Movement Center, and Amy Ellenbogen, therapist and the founder of Conspiring for Good. So thank you to all the panelists, and thank you all for being here. And now I will turn the microphone to Shauna Skarsiga, our Director of Special Projects, who is going to be moderating tonight's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela, and thank you to everyone for being here tonight. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are on the unceded lands of the Lenape people, Lenapehoking, and I encourage everyone to do research about how to support the indigenous stewards of this land that we are on before we dive into speaking about our demands for the mayor of the city that we all live in. With that being said, we will keep this conversation in a similar vein of as we did our at the table conversation. So it will be a conversation. We'll start on food with Candace Thompson and Nathan Hunter. We'll shift into on shelter with Betty Yu and Michael Higgins, and then we'll conclude with on health with Jeff Kasper and Amy Ellenbogen. With that being said, I'll turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves, and thank you all for being here.
I'm here by way of Connecticut, of Hartford, and so I'm grateful to be in community with Bronxites. In my professional work, I'm employed by New York City Parks and am managed by the Bronx River Alliance, and I head up a project that's called the Bronx River Foodway, which is a series of edible landscapes that exist inside of Concrete Plant Park. And it's one of the first examples of an edible food forest or edible kind of landscapes accessible to residents without fences or borders or boundaries. And it's the only space on public land where we actually encourage you to forage, since there is a prohibition around foraging. So a lot of my work focuses kind of on the activation of Concrete Plant Park, where this is located in the South Bronx, around bringing in the communities that existed in that space pre the development of the park, because it was a former concrete factory. And so there's these different eras and histories that I'm tying together through this activation and this kind of small scale pilot. But my work is kind of expansive as a land steward throughout the Bronx. And yeah, really great to be in company with you all. And I can hand it over to Betty.
I'm Betty, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm calling in from Brooklyn, New York, land of Canarse, which was a tribe within the Lenape-Hoking people. And yeah, I'm really excited to dig in and see some familiar names here, and so that's going to be great. But just briefly, I am a socially engaged multimedia artist. And a lot of my work in the past, decade or so has really been addressing issues of gentrification and displacement, and how it is closely tied in with, migration and immigration, and even, policing policy as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, I know, later on. But I also helped co-found a group called Chinatown Art Brigade in 2015. And so when we were seeing a huge influx of the creative class coming into Chinatown, basically artist galleries, and all of their amenities and all of their folks kind of coming into Chinatown, realizing that the government has really created these incentives for real estate to really bring in these galleries, and pitting long-term residents against Chinatown residents. And we see what's going on in Chinatown really as a microcosm of what's going on around the city, in respect to how artists have been used really as a vanguard, and maybe not even knowing it, as a vanguard in displacing longtime residents. Anyway, we've collaborated with Chinatown Tenants Union, which is a part of CAB, Organizing Asian Communities. And since 9/11, they've been in Chinatown fighting displacement on a sort of building to building level, and also fighting for big policy change to dissuade this kind of real estate development, and make sure that long-term residents, in this case, Chinatown, Chinese speaking, monolingual speaking immigrants, can stay in their homes. So we've been doing projections, we've done evening projections, we used new media as a way to tell stories, know your rights videos with a lot of the tenants, but always central to the whole process is working with the tenants to co-create these stories, whether it's media or videos that we're projecting on these large screens at night. So we feel very strongly that art and culture can play a very, very powerful role, and is a powerful tool in social change. And so we're continuing to do that work even through the pandemic. So I will pass it to my colleague, Mike, from the Brooklyn Movement Center.
Thanks, Betty. So again, my name is Michael, he or they, and happy again to be a part of this conversation. So I'm an organizer at Brooklyn Movement Center. BMC has been around about 10 years. It's a hyper-local kind of organizing group here in Central Brooklyn. And, my past work has historically been around kind of tenant organizing, mostly in public housing in Brooklyn, but also dealing with kind of like the intersections of public housing issues, land use, and environmental injustice. And so, the work that I've done, both as like a paid staff organizer and also as a part-time tour guide, has to, I think, lay out the politics of certain decisions that the city's made around kind of like, what is our affordable housing policy, and who's the target, and who are the populations are left out. What has been kind of the choices that the city's made around public housing, and why is it in such bad shape? And in terms of like in a changing city and a changing climate, where do lower income people constantly find themselves within kind of like the, being often shaped by these decisions are often made without them or unbeknownst to them. And so happy to, really chime in on what I'm seeing from the Adams administration thus far and to hear what you guys have to say. Thank you again for joining me, for having me. And I guess I'll pass to Amy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amy Ellenbogen. I use she, her pronouns. I have worked in the issue of community-driven safety for 2 decades, maybe even a little longer. I'm really interested in how people can come together outside of police, other forms of institutions, and create neighborhood safety, create spiritual safety, create all kinds of emotional safety. I am also the director of art strategies at the Center for Court Innovation, and we look at ways that art can be incorporated as a way of diverting people out of the criminal justice system or the criminal legal system. And I am a therapist and also a mom. And I will pass it to you, Jeff.
So much. Hi, everyone. So happy to be in conversation tonight. And, really excited to, hear from everyone's really amazing perspective. So I'm Jeff Kasper. I'm an artist and educator. I am a New Yorker. I live in between New York and Western Massachusetts. I am, in addition to my artistic practice, I am a strategic advisor to More Art. I have worked with the organization for the past almost about 7 years. I was formerly the director of engagement. Currently, I am assistant professor of design at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. I'm also a faculty associate in the health research group of part of the Institute for Diversity Sciences, also a health and society medicine and culture fellow at Smith College. My work over the last couple of years has focused a lot on disability culture and really trying to bring conversations to the public around, making an accessible art space, accessible city. And that has manifested in a lot of public conversations at cultural institutions and as well as exhibitions. As an artist, I focus on public art and design. I recently had an exhibition, a sort of 2-part public space activation in 2 different locations in New York City, one in Rockaway, on the Rockaway Beach Boardwalk, and the other in Staten Island along the Stapleton waterfront. And that work was called Soft Spots, and it really focused on sort of, I think of it as sort of subverting the language of social distancing in a way to really kind of provoke questions around anxiety, care, who we call on for support, and kind of, I'm really interested in ways that art can be used to generate well-being for folks. So yeah, I'm super excited to chat with you all tonight.
Thanks, everyone. I'm very honored that you're all here. So let's dive in. Let's start with on food. And I know that Candace and Nathan were both present for that conversation. And obviously, we're talking about some pretty dense issues and issues that have roots that extend beyond this mayor's 2 months in office. And we have an hour to discuss them. So we can't knock everything out, and we can try. But let's just try to think, some of the things that you've been saying, like, so what are for the two of you some short or long-term steps forward for the city that would allow for equitable practices for people to be fed, to engage citizens of all generations in education around food ecosystems and where their food comes from, and why healthy food is an integral part of the city, obviously. And what ground plans for sustainable food justice might exist within the city.
So I think I'm gonna kick it off and Candace jump in any moment. What's great about this is Candace and I have facilitated together, so this is fun. But I think, the short term and kind of the accessible goal, or like the low hanging fruit for me, is really around composting, which is a big thing. Like food waste it's really staggering. It's one of like the things that's kind of New York's famous for, like smelly streets, like rats. Like it's almost like if we remove the trash, will we get in trouble by society? But I think composting, we are so close to stabilizing that infrastructure for the city, and I would be really bummed if we didn't see further progress on that. And so I would just like to see kind of obviously the support of the institutions that already exist, especially the grassroots ones that are kind of just hanging on, especially during the pandemic. Many disappeared, like a lot of spaces disappeared, but a lot of our community gardens were thriving, right? And were the backbone for our composting program, which shows that micro and like local composting can exist and should be supported. And it actually doesn't need too much to get going. So that feels like very low hanging on the local scale, right, with the community gardens, but on a larger scale, these like larger stations that we have around the city, like the compost projects they're called. I would love to just see those strengthened and fortified. So that's a big one. Candace, I don't know if you want to go back and forth here.
Yeah, why not? Let's have a convo. I mean, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the good thing is that, like, as you said, Nathan, like having those local community hubs are so important, and obviously then give us the ability to very quickly take food waste and put it back into the earth and help kind of dilute the contamination that we know is so prevalent. But then citywide organics can also manage all of the things like compostable servingware and all of that cannot go into those spaces, or the meats and the oily stuff and the salty stuff. And so like we really have to have both. It's not an either or. Compost, that's one. That's easy, super easy.
For sure.
And that's a pretty simple thing for, the brown boxes outside of apartments that should be available for NYCHA residents as well. It's, every apartment building should have this city funded initiative. The same way we have recyclables, we have blue bins, we should have brown bins.
And every restaurant as well. Nathan, one thing I was thinking about is, the several instances I've heard, particularly through North Bronx Collective, of community gardens losing their air rights. So I was thinking about development and how it is infringing not only community gardens, but like literally Brooklyn Botanical Garden had to fight to like keep themselves from losing their daylight. And so, gentrification and development are just such a big issue that impacts our ability to grow food for ourselves. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think land access in general. I mean, I think you name an important resource that exists and has backing and strength and a board and like BLT or the land trust movement in the city. But I think just in general, the work that we do collectively, independently, is really around just the commons, right? And the consideration of the commons. And it's been exciting to see the momentum around activation of commons. I know both of us are supportive of a kind of burgeoning coalition called Nice Cabs, kind of focusing on communities activating public spaces, right? And like, what does that mean? And like, who are those people activating, and how do we support those that have the least power, I think, in society? And that's kind of what we're examining right now, kind of on a very because we're in the world that we're working in. But I think just the conversation around the commons, and for us, I think we're often talking about foraging. talking about obviously moving forward in smart methods. I think, Candace, you have some really great ideas around licenses, like a foraging license, or around like training models.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you know, baseline, don't decriminalize it. You know, I mean, even I remember at an event that maybe it was a Nice Caps thing, somebody was talking about how they were at the Bronx Foodway, or an elder was at the Bronx Foodway, and they were harvesting something, and a cop came up and stopped them and was like, "You can't do that here." And it's like, mind your freaking business. Yes, they can. And like, you know, that's literally a place where it is sanctioned to do it. And so like, we need to get on the same page about that. We need to have literacy about that. Yeah, and then the other side of that, of course, and something that I think that Nathan's actually going to be doing a lot of this year, and maybe we'll be doing some of at the tiny little bit of STICOVE that still exists, is soil testing and helping people understand the soil that we are all blessed to stand on, and understand how we can care for it better. Do you want to talk about those, Nathan, your soil testing?
Yeah, I mean, I think resourcing, one thing that I've noticed as a Bronx resident, I came to the city as a student and have been serving the Bronx for about 12 years now, and have kind of seen iterations and specifically in the garden world. And soil testing is always one of those things that you would think would be really easy to do. And everyone's like, oh, we'll just get a soil testing. And we have resources in Brooklyn, and we have Cornell Cooperative, which is, they're great resources. But I think the idea of not giving us more access rather than, you know, like right now we're kind of at, we don't have as much access to the machinery, the tools, the knowledge, even just like the training for our students to like understand how to move forward and become the scientists to test these things, right? There just needs to be more money and energy put into, I think, everything from education to the actual materialization of the labs and stuff. And equity. So that's what I'm getting at, equity. The Bronx does not have like a headquarters. And so I'm excited to be collaborating with Cornell to bring an XRF machine, which tests for lead in soil and other toxic metals, to the Bronx, and offering, you know, public testing days. And I think that's just me having access to someone who has access to the tool and making a collection, you know, a collective action to create equity. But we need long-term solutions, right? Like, this is a short-term solution.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I've even spoken to people at NRCS who were like, every community should have one of those XRF guns. You know, they're not cheap. They're $35,000. That's not, you know, that's cost of a very fancy pickup truck. But like, you know, it's not impossible for that to happen. They're not hard to use. And then for us to be able to have a space where we can crowdsource that information so that we're not kind of doubling efforts in that way. This is something that happens on kind of like an acreage or a mile basis if you're talking about kind of farmland, or you're talking about land outside the city. But in a place like New York, we need that almost on a very micro level to be able to understand where the hot spots are, which is not just a big deal for foraging. It's a big deal. Like, we're all breathing that stuff all day long.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not some kind of, you know, flippant investment. It's an actual investment in the city and its citizens, and there should be funding. And like you're saying, there is no equity, there is no funding for places like the Bronx. And like you're saying, Candace, your park is being shut down, or is shut down. You know, these limited spaces that we have in the city to do this kind of work that actually has long-term health benefits for everyone are being shut down. And so on that note, I know we did talk a bit in the at the table conversation about education and ensuring that, you know, we're not only educating young people, but we're also drawing from the wisdom of elders and the land stewards who have been here for generations, and also the people in the middle who are maybe left out of the conversation sometimes. And so this is a very casual question that, you know, we can answer in a few seconds, but given these things, you know, we've already kind of pinpointed there needs to be more equity and funding around the tools and supporting the stewards of the land for the overall health of the city. What would you like the mayor and the city council to hear as people deeply entrenched in this work? Just a few key things, tangible things that, you know, could be put into legislation.
Well, I'll start by saying that I think what's really exciting about having this conversation together is that these issues are so intertwined and mutually inclusive. And so, I think one of the things that I have witnessed in my very short time interfacing with government entities, especially around construction as of recent, is just how siloed everything is, and how I'm not going to share details, but just the inability of the way things are currently structured to address root issues, as opposed to just like putting Band-Aids on symptoms. And, like building a giant flood wall when the seas are going to rise 10 feet, as opposed to doing something maybe a little bit more substantial. And so I guess, I would really like that kind of holistic thinking to be kind of part of what's going on. I saw that Eric Adams recently kind of merged 3 different arms of like resilience and climate and sustainability offices into an environmental justice office. And so I'll be very curious to see whether or not that's just like a, clever way to brand a downsizing, or if that is actually going to be as holistic as it needs to be. I would like to see food forests like what Nathan runs in every community instead of another condo. I would like for those spaces to be spaces of health and culture and ecological resilience, but I wouldn't like them to spark green gentrification. And we're gonna have to pay for that by taxing the rich. And that's my mic drop, and that's all I got to say.
Oh my God, how can I follow up on that? I mean, mine is very similar. I think resiliency hubs, like the food web, right? Like that are based on food, but even more expansive, right? I'm part of the millennial generation, and I'm just like, I don't even know what I'm gonna be dealing with when I'm a senior. And so I'm kind of like, I want my neighborhood to be as tough and as ready to deal with whatever is coming. So I want resiliency hubs, not just like buildings with someone's name on it, but I want something that's actually functioning and owned by the citizens in that neighborhood. So it always comes back to the local, whatever it is. And I think what you just said, Candace, around system thinking is necessary for survival. But we can start with food forests and go from there.
Baby steps, we're talking about bureaucracy. They need baby steps sometimes. Thank you both. It's been an honor to share this space with you. It was an honor to share the space during At the Table. I've linked to both of your websites. You can follow the Bronx Foodways, see what work they're doing, support them, as well as Candace's work. And really, we're hoping that through these conversations, we spark a conversation, we start a conversation, not wrap it up in a bow. So please, at More Art, we'll be sharing the work that you're doing as well. So thank you both for this right now. And with that said, obviously there was some allusion to this already, but let's shift on shelter. We know that all of these things are delicately interconnected. So Betty and Michael, hello again.
Hi there. I guess we could be fluid, Mike, if you want to chime in, or I think I was going to kick it off and then kind of do it back and forth.
Yeah.
I love how Candace and Nathan were sort of fluid, and you can tell that you guys are a good tag team. Okay, yeah. So much to say around shelter and housing, but I will just make some key points, which will draw on the conversation that I helped facilitate a couple of months ago, where the major points are outlined in that letter, which I think is really great. And then just kind of draw on some of my local experience in doing cultural organizing and advocacy work in Chinatown locally. But I will just say that, to echo even Candace, when you were all talking about supporting the local groups that are actually doing the work and making sure that they are thriving and are able to continue doing that on grassroots level. I would say the same, goes for a lot of the folks who are doing the housing rights work, whether it's with tenants or homeowners, NYCHA residents, folks who are most impacted. So I think really making sure that they are able to thrive. And I don't mean necessarily government giving them money, right? Because in many ways, when you take money from the government, it's hard to hold them accountable. But I mean, in general, for audiences out there to really find out who your local tenant advocacy group is, or tenants union, or folks who are doing this kind of work, and making sure that they are able to be sustained and have the resources they need to do this work. As folks probably know, like a couple of weeks ago, Mayor Adams named Jessica Katz as the housing czar. And she does have a history of housing advocacy. She was the ED of a housing group, right? And I know that there are housing rights advocates who feel excited about this, but are very cautious. But I also think that we all have to be really cautious, right? Of not being, once again, co-opted, like the Bloomberg administration did, where he bought off a lot of housing groups, right? When he was running for his third term. And those are the dangers of the nonprofit industrial complex, right? When you get money thrown at you and that kind of thing. And so I think it's this balance of of really supporting the folks who are actually doing the work on the ground. I think it just needs to be overstated again and again, because they're, and I think, centering policies where people and communities are the decision makers. They're the ones who made the communities what they are. And now the city and developers want to come in and displace them, but they should dictate what happens in their neighborhood. And so that's being, self-educated and educating yourself about zoning policy, right? Zoning policy, I know we talked a lot about it on that at the table call, but it seems benign and it seems so boring and innocuous, but we know that zoning policy dictates everything, right? And some folks are calling for a moratorium on upzoning. So upzoning, right, goes through city council. The mayor has final say, but the city council has a very, very big hand at what happens in the community. So upzoning allows for neighborhoods to be changed, and then for high rises to come in and replace the small mom and pop place or the small homeowners. So that's really, really critical. And I think that more folks need to really, truly understand zoning practices and how the city government and these corporations, these real estate corporations, are using it to really get away with a lot of get away with what they're getting away with, right? And so I think alongside that, we need to really dissuade big real estate from building high rises. And so we talked a lot about the higher taxes on new buildings, but right now there's a lot of loopholes and a lot of tax breaks, right, for investors, for domestic investors. In Chinatown, really quickly, what we're seeing is a lot of these same practices. So you're seeing a lot of these LLCs, like these corporation names, that are just shell companies, where it's developers from China, from overseas, and local that get away with development and tax breaks. And it's hard to hold the one individual accountable for what is happening. And they're also doing warehousing. So people always ask me, oh, what's happening in these immigrant communities like Chinatown during the pandemic? And I said, nothing has really changed. In fact, if anything, these real estate developers are profiting from this disaster capitalism, as we call it, right? They're actually able to buy off a lot of the mortgages that the mom and pop landlords and the mom and pop places can't pay off. So it's actually ramped up. If anything, it's not like, oh, the pandemic has stalled anything at all. And so I think that's one thing we have to really, really be careful of. And then the other things I just want to echo that were also in our conversation and the letter, which is that making sure NYCHA is not privatized, and that making sure that NYCHA residents can thrive, can live in healthy and livable conditions, because they themselves are part of the community that makes the community great. And then the last few things that we explored and talked about was this idea of community land trust, finding alternatives where community members can actually own their own property. In New York City, we only have one community land trust, which is on Cooper Square Committee, which is on 4th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenue, which I'm sure we all know where the arts groups are and local arts space, local art spaces rent out of. And so we need more of that. And so figuring out ways that, I know New York City is expensive, figuring ways that we can really, really, truly work towards solutions. I'll stop. There's a few other things, but I'll stop there and I'll just pass the virtual baton to Mike.
Thank you, Betty. I want to actually just take a moment to actually take the conversation back to something that Candace and Nathan said around kind of equity. And, you know, I think often conversations around housing and land use are deeply inequitable for a number of reasons. And I'll talk about just like one thing that I think might be useful for folks to know. So when de Blasio was first elected back in 2013, he ran on a platform that he would preserve or build 200,000 new apartments across the city. And so he's looking around the city and saying, okay, well, I can preserve a certain amount of these apartments, but I also need to build in certain places. And so what often happens is that it's a kind of a lot of calculus in terms of finding the right location to put those units. And it's certainly not happening everywhere. So what often happens is that you have to find a local council member that's willing to play, willing to play ball, or a community that's willing to say, okay, well, we'll take these additional units if you give us certain things. So whether that's like certain programming, maybe it's additional infrastructure. And so it often puts communities that kind of find themselves like the target of these plans, one on the defense, and it's deeply kind of unfair, where particularly you have kind of like those in these communities who have extremely low incomes, who, I think often feel like, there's housing being built, but they will never be able to get into it. And so like, the city has developed, I would say band-aids to a certain extent. So like today there's something called mandatory inclusionary housing, which says that if you rezone an area to a certain extent, there's certain percentage of apartments that's required. It helps, but it often just, these lotteries literally have, tens, hundreds of thousands of people who are applying for sometimes hundreds of apartments. And so I would say that the city really needs to think about equity in terms of, I think Eric Adams, he's, I think, a little less guarded in the ways I think maybe Bloomberg or de Blasio were, people who like, either had background in real estate or, were previously in the city council and understood kind of like the backroom deals of like the process of like creating like a negotiation. We always talk about equity. We always talk about, oh, well, like, doing your fair share. But, there are a lot of communities that have kind of like really fought any type of housing in their neighborhood. So, I remember back to conversations before the pandemic where, a good friend of mine who's an organizer out in Queens, she, her background was really kind of like organizing the homeless, and like that again, like there are entire swaths of the city where there are no homeless shelters because there's such deep resistance to any sort of kind of like shelter for people who are either coming off the street or just supportive housing for people who are trying to get themselves on their feet. And for stepping up, saying like, look, this is my neighborhood, I love it here, people deserve dignity. And I'm seeing more and more of my neighbors out on the streets because rents are going up, housing isn't being built to meet the people's needs, while our wages aren't going up, but rents are. We need to house and hold some of the burden for shelters. And she got death threats, and so we have to, I think, start thinking about what equity looks like. So in terms of our shelter system, the vast majority of shelters in the city are really kind of like placed in a handful of different neighborhoods. We can all probably imagine where they are. In terms of, even like the big projects that, I'm always kind of coming back, and I do tours around kind of what happened at Atlantic Yards, which is now called Pacific Park, right? So it was this, it was supposed to be the slam dunk that, you know, kind of the Marty Markowitz of the world and the Michael Bloomberg's said that, you know, well, this would be great affordable housing for everybody. And, you know, we're now 20 years down the line, and the majority of those units still haven't been built. Like, not even that they're done, there's literally not even like a shovel in the ground. And so I think we have to, you know, we have to plan our own futures. We have to plan the futures for our communities. In certain communities, that seriously means thinking about displacement, and like, you know, what that looks like for each neighborhood is different. But I think we have to get out of the mindset of, you know, unfortunately, in, you know, a lot of lower and even, you know, middle income communities where, again, like the goal is to own a house. The goal is to kind of like, nothing must change. And change is always going to happen. And I would much rather us direct that change towards a certain goal and have a very pivotal part in what that change is, versus trying to fight change and then basically have change implemented on us in a way where that ultimately just, you know, disrupts our lives and disrupts our communities. So
can I just add to that what you just said in terms of futures and us actually dictating what our future communities look like around all these issues? One example that I wanted to really highlight that folks may know about, in Chinatown, there's been something called the Chinatown Working Group Plan that has been 10 years in the making, where after 9/11, folks saw what was happening in their backyards, in their communities, and small business owners, with nonprofits, housing groups, about 50 to 60 groups came together in 2008, 2009, said, this is the plan that we want. And now we have a new city council person who is actually comes from the grassroots movement, and we'll see, you know, he wants to push this Chinatown Working Group Plan. He wants to pass it, and then it goes to the mayor's table or, you know, desk, but it dissuades big box stores. It dissuades high-rise condos from going up. We have some of the biggest condos in the city going up, right, in Two Bridges and the Lower East Side. It's been 10 years in the making. It's just absolutely terrible. No give back at all whatsoever to the community. And then also, more importantly, we have 85% of Chinatown, Lower East Side are renters, right? And so, and that many of them are elders in Chinatown. And so how do we make sure that they get to thrive and live in their communities? Right now, the condition, there's no accountability for landlords who deprive heat. You know, we saw what happened with the Bronx, literally the building, the burning of the building in the Bronx, right? And we know the landlord was on Eric Adams' transition team, right? So these landlords have to be held accountable to the fullest extent, but the laws are very, very weak on that end, right? They punish and criminalize tenants more than they actually criminalize unscrupulous landlords. Last thing I'll say is Adams, he takes a lot of real estate money. This last campaign, he took a lot of real estate money. When he was running for Brooklyn Borough President, he took a lot of real estate money. And I have to say that his tough on crime, as we all know, his increasing of policing and militarizing the streets across New York City, instead of putting money into housing and jobs and healthcare and education that we know will address the root causes of all this that is happening, he is militarizing the streets. He wants to keep Rikers open. He wants to, bring back solitary confinement. He wants to lower the age for criminalizing youth. I mean, he wants to reverse bail reform. So all that, and he supported a lot of rezoning and upzoning. So, there's an opportunity there. He says a lot of great things if you look at his platform, but his actions speak louder. So I think that we have to be organized to push, like Mike was saying, it's about, not sitting idly by, not like any of us are going to, but it's like, us really charting out that future that we want to see around housing justice, around all these issues, and then not relying on the government, because whether it's Adams or Bloomberg or even a progressive mayor, we're going to have to hold them accountable. So
absolutely. And this, just to echo what you mentioned this today, and you also mentioned this during the at the table conversation, is that oftentimes the city council will pretend like they don't have the power to influence a lot of these upzoning laws and a lot of these things that could stop at city council. And so I want to echo that know who your council member is, reach out to them, and demand these things. They work for us, and we can learn. Like, I've been an admirer of Chinatown Art Brigade for years, and the Brooklyn Movement Center is a fantastic organization. I've linked to the Chinatown Working Group plan. And I think, hearing you speak, Betty, I think it would be useful maybe on our website, and we could collaborate on this, to have some resources from everything that everyone's brought up, because you're right, we can't silo this information. All of these things are connected, and the more people know, the more they can take action. Thank you both for sharing. I mean, I could sit and listen to you talk for hours, and there would still be more to talk about. So like I said, with Candace and Nathan, please, to everyone in the audience and everyone watching this recording later, we will link to the resources. The links are in the chat, and hopefully this is the start of a conversation. Organize. Great, and speaking of interconnectedness, let's shift on health, which is something that has, as Michaela mentioned, and as all of us are living in our Zoom screens right now, something that has been at the forefront of everyone's mind. And speaking to disability justice, Jeff, something that has been on the forefront of many people's minds long before we had the kind of practices that we undertake with this pandemic. So I guess, feel free to, I'm really loving the energy from both of the two groups so far. So maybe Amy, you and Jeff can just have a conversation. I mean, let's talk about a city that prioritizes the holistic well-beings of its citizens and provides support pre-crisis. That's something we talked about. Safe schools, equitable healthcare, and mental health care that is robust and not only at a crisis level, and builds long-term systems of care for all New Yorkers. Another very casual, easy to answer question that I'm sure you both have all of the answers to, but I'll leave it to you.
I can start us off. In the events that I've been a part of, lots of different conversations on health and workshops that I've had over the pandemic. One of the things that, so just as a sort of to just describe, I will do a lot of sort of arts-based workshops, really kind of spaces for people just kind of process what's going on in their lives. And it has, usually a lot to do with concepts of sort of navigating the boundaries of like being a caretaker or needing to be supported by someone else. And this has kind of become a really more mainstream conversation for us all now in the pandemic. In some conversations I've had with neighbors and folks in these kind of public or private dialogues, one thing that comes up a lot is like how most folks are not really thinking about how institutions support them. I feel like one of the major things that comes up is like, oh, like I would never go to the city to to look for this, or there's this sort of there's this distrust in, and rightfully so, in working with institutional spaces. Folks don't see themselves in it, whether you're, it doesn't matter even what sort of community you're in. It seems that there's kind of a divide there. I understand that, and I agree with it in many senses, but I also feel there's an opportunity to kind of bring together the resources of institutions and city government with the kind of really robust mutual aid and sort of community networks that are that I think became really visible in these last years, but have been really have deep roots right in our community. So yeah, I guess I kind of want to start there, is like how can we really effectively empower, people-centered movements for health kind of first, because that's really where people are at.
That was so interesting. Thank you, Jeff. I have been thinking a lot about investing in what you want to grow. I feel like I want the city to invest in things that we know work and that we want to like move into the thriving space, right? And divest from things that harm people, shame people, or shun people, isolate people, torture people. So like prisons, solitary confinement, stop those things and invest in these basic things. And I've been shifting in my professional and personal life from macro level change to individual change. And it's so interesting to me how this conversation we're having about all these structural needs is very parallel to what would happen if I was meeting with a client who's having like a mental health problem. And I would say, like, let's start like, how are you eating? How are you exercising? Are you drinking enough water? Like all these things. And then like people can't do those things. These are baseline because their food is unhealthy. We aren't supported enough to get it. They don't have space to exercise or place to exercise, or we've incarcerated them and they can't move. These are, they're not simple to fix, but what I would love to see is a real movement within the government structure to look at all of these issues as interwoven, like intra-government, I don't know what it's called. Break down the silos, as everyone's saying, to really look not at survival, but at wellness, at thriving, like aim higher, and listen to the wisdom of the people with the lived experience. So here in like mental health space, the role that peers, meaning people who experience mental illness or diagnosis has been given to them, can play a role in responding to mental health crisis. The most critical piece, prevention. I feel like all of us need more education on how we can express ourselves, handle conflict, de-escalate tension, learn those skills. Healthy people need to learn that. We see that that those would give us the skills so that when our neighbors are outside and having a crisis of some sort, maybe we've already prevented it because we have gotten them we've decreased those stressors, right? The pressure of their rent, money, the having access to healthy and safe food. Maybe we've done it, but if we haven't, then we have the relationships and the tools to help them without locking them up or institutionalizing them, criminalizing them. Those are my first thoughts on this.
Absolutely. I think that makes me think of one thing. I believe this was your idea, Jeff, and maybe we can revisit it, was, a community health core, a core of people that, instead of, oh, there's a mental health crisis, let's send the cops, that leads, people, maybe this person is homeless or this person has eaten or what have you, all of these intersecting basic needs not being met. And then on top of that, we send a cop to deal with something that they're not trained to deal with. And so we talked, a bit about maybe like a community health core, a community, de-escalation task force, having social workers more present, that to echo your point, Jeff, a lot of people don't know where to get these services. Not only do they distrust them, but they don't even know where to go. And the city doesn't do, this is something we talked about a little bit in the conversations. People don't know that, down the street, this clinic actually offers these things that you need, because that advertisement isn't reaching the people that it needs to reach, or there is a distrust of the system. So maybe you can talk a little bit, both of you. I know that Amy have a robust background, both in therapy and in, prison justice. And Jeff, obviously thinking about these systems of care, maybe, and address this however you would like, or approach this however you would like. But I'm thinking, if there's a city council member that watches this, or the mayor sees this, who's not thinking the way that we're thinking about these things, to say tangibly, if people aren't getting these things, you're not going to have a healthy city. If you don't have a healthy city, you're not doing your job, and everything goes to hell. So maybe you can touch on that point a little bit, both of you.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this and on the On Health conversation, but I feel that there's often a devaluing of the way, sort of the expertise, the lived experience of folks that really know how to navigate these, sort of health crises. Disabled folks, people of color have been really, creating solutions and creating health in their communities in many ways. Like they should be, valued as part of the health infrastructure. The ways in which families organize resources, within families and connecting, between families in a neighborhood block or in a building, how resources are shared, how information is disseminated. Like this is not this is very much of the building blocks of health. And I feel I think that needs to be empowered on a city government level, in the sense of really being able to kind of connect the threads between not only just the sort of health infrastructure or lack thereof in across the city, but really connect people to these sort of kind of what feel like peopleless or nameless groups, right? So yeah, I feel, even now in the pandemic, where we have an increased sort of access to being able to share information, we're able to be at home, and we can be in meetings like this. More people can participate in many ways. I feel that the folks who have originated those kinds of practices aren't really brought to the table at all in making decisions. So yeah, that's how I would respond right now.
And I think that there's already small groups who are practicing, and they need to be invested in and supported. And there should be lots. We know what we're doing is failing. So let's experiment with many different ways of solving this, and not experiment at like the $150,000 level, right? Like we can take that overtime pay from Department of Corrections and divert it towards learning how neighborhoods could be involved in de-escalating situations without using the police.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because so in conversations I have with folks who are interested in sort of healthcare innovation, the kind of first thing that folks talk about is like, everybody knows healthcare is busted. Like that's actually like the general consensus. Yet we really aren't moving past that disdain. It's like, okay, yes, but and I totally agree. There's also not really one solution, and that we do need city level intervention and government level intervention, but there's so much that is interpersonal and sort of small group oriented that can help increase health and well-being on the sort of felt lived level first. We can work in both directions.
Absolutely. Thank you both. And again, I've linked to Jeff's work, I've linked to Amy's work, and this is obviously an ongoing conversation. And we will, provide some resources along with this recording after the panel. But thank you both. It's an honor to share space with both of you. I guess in our last remaining bit of time, if anyone from the audience has any questions or comments that they'd like to bring up, feel free to put them in the chat or turn on your camera and ask whatever feels comfortable. And if not, if there are any questions from the panelists for the other panelists, now is also a time. I know that everything is really deeply linked together. Any questions? Did we solve the food, shelter, and health crisis of New York City? Great. This is, obviously I've been present for all of these conversations and here listening to you again, and I cannot echo enough the amazing work that is being done in the city. We're talking about these daunting, massive undertakings, and to see people really on the ground thinking from, the minutia of care and the minutia of what collaboration means and the minutia of, stewardship and true leadership, and seeing these creative voices coming together. I can't remember who said it, but it is, things can feel dark and overwhelming, but there are people like the people in this panel who are, doing the work, and it's not work that can only be done by these people. We hope that with this letter, it empowers people to collectivize, to organize, to educate themselves, to educate other people, and to really think about, short-term and long-term, what a healthy New York City means, and to hold people in power accountable. Enough is enough. That, we can't, it's not just a matter of sustaining the city for the next year or two. It's a matter of sustaining the city and the people on this land for generations to come, and to see the people doing the groundwork now to ensure that that is the case. It's a real honor to share space with all of you.
Can I just say one thing? Sorry. I was just thinking of, I think this is such a valuable conversation. I have to say that as an arts organization, that you all kind of creating space, convening folks together, advocates, artists, organizers in this way is so unique and really just very refreshing. But I just want to say that as an artist myself, who was also an activist and someone who feels deeply accountable to the community I'm in, that organize in the different Chinatowns, I do want to really, I think individual action obviously is very limited, but that to hold ourselves really accountable to that bar as well. And just to encourage folks to look at, I think it might have been mentioned, or maybe I forgot to mention it, but Chinatown Art Brigade put out a artist pledge a little while ago, a couple years ago. And I have to say, it was inspired by equality for Flatbush, which I know Michael Higgins works closely, and the groups that he works with works closely with Equality for Flatbush. But it's this idea of like, what can folks who maybe are not at the front lines, I hate the word allies for the lack of a better term, allies or artists, right? Like, how can they actually be stewards in their community and be on the right side? Because I think in Chinatown, a lot of folks say, well, I'm just one person, like I needed a place to live, we needed a place to open our gallery, so we just came here. Well, that's not good enough. It's like, educate yourself, understand why that storefront was vacated. It was because that hair salon couldn't pay the rent. The landlord could have reduced the rent but didn't, evicted them. And now you've got this big, artist commercial gallery that came in, and then is going to raise the real estate values, of course. Call out the warehousing. So warehousing is simply, all the for retail or for rent signs that you see all across the city. It's not because, the city is in crisis financially. It's because a landlord who's a big landlord, like one of the Kushners or something, can hold on to it and not rent at 20% of the rate to a mom and pop place. They're just holding on to it. So these are things that we can just make ourselves aware of, and be allies and get involved in the local fights, support our neighbors who are fighting the evictions and, that kind of thing. So definitely want to shout out the Brooklyn Anti-Gentrification Network for doing a lot of amazing work on the ground as well. It's a conglomeration of different groups. But anyway, I just wanted to say that, sometimes we want to absolve ourselves, but then it's like the individual, of course, is a part of this larger, it's part of the larger structural, behemoth that feels insurmountable. But we can make it happen. We can push for this kind of accountability, because we know that the real estate, at least in the city, real estate and the government has been working hand in hand, and we need to disrupt that. There's these new 4 jails that they want to build in the city. And Eric Adams in the fall said, yeah, I'm against the jails. And now he's for the jails, right? So this is, we know jails are not the solution at all. And so they're about to break ground in Chinatown in about a week or two. And they already evicted all the small businesses. They're about to demolish them. So there's a call to action around that as well, that we'll probably post on our Instagram. But anyway, all that to say that we have the power to make that change too, starting with ourselves. So. And I'm very feel privileged to share space with you. So I just want to say that.
So I feel that's a good place to come to an end. And it's been really amazing to hear from everybody. And I wanted to give a shout out to Sean Escarciga, who has been an amazing moderator for the conversation. So thanks, everybody.